Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are awash in the sea of Donald Trump's id, and I guess Elon Musk's id as well. It's funny, just before we started the podcast, we were talking about the president's speech on Tuesday, two nights ago. And I told my colleagues I didn't watch it. Now that might sound kind of weird, and it probably is kind of weird. Like, Josh, what the fuck is your job? Like, why didn't you watch the speech, right? And that's a good question. And because I sometimes I mean, in general, for 30 years, I watch all of these things because I'm kind of obsessed. And uh, in recent years, sometimes I will watch things on rebroadcast, right? Because just for whatever reason. And in this particular case, I was having kind of a conversation with myself over the weekend, and I don't know, Monday or something like that. And I think what I felt was, um, and this is going to count the same for many reporters, certainly the other reporters on our staff, but just kind of in my own dialogue with myself, thought, I'm really pushing everything to the limit right now. I'm spending like all of my time reporting, much more of my time than I normally did, just because we're in this, national crisis, right? And there's so many things happening, and that's fine. I'm doing fine. Not not woe is me. It's much better to be mostly a spectator on some of the terrible things that are happening within the federal government right now. But I thought about it, and I just thought, you know what? I'm doing my part here. I don't want to watch this. I don't. I just um I just don't want to watch it. I don't want to watch this guy's bullshit. Um and maybe that was a good decision or bad decision. You can I wanted to see what people said about it after the fact, and we were talking just before we started recording that it kind of seems like the speech has not generated a lot of viral moments, right? I don't know if your experience is different, but it's not like, oh, there's that one moment that everybody's talking about, the way that, what is it, a few years ago, where Marge Green got in a big argument with Joe Biden and all these kind of things. What I told my colleagues is there was the one thing I have seen is this heartbreaking story with this little boy who apparently has terminal cancer, and they uh, I don't know what's honorary and what's not, but they made him a Secret Service officer, and that's the Trumpers are terrible people, but I'm glad they did that. These are heartbreaking stories. Um, Aside from that, I haven't seen much. Uh, and In any case, I'm not wanting to focus too much on what people might reasonably see as my irresponsibility or shirking my duties. But I do wonder if it's a bit of a microcosm for kind of where the country is right now, because I know this guy's line. I know all the lies he's going to tell. I know about the I don't know, the malicious taunting behavior. And we are all dealing with that on the macro level because he's dismantling the government, or the guy who is he is deputized to do it is dismantling the government. So we are dealing with everything. And I don't know, it was just this limit I created for myself. And I only mention that again, probably partly to explain if I don't have too much great commentary to say on the speech, but more just as I suspect that I am not alone, um, in 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 some aspect of that, even though most people don't have the job that I do, and most people aren't reporters and all that kind of stuff. So, in any case, with that said, there is a ton going on, and we are, I guess, what are we, 6 weeks into this now? we're kind of now where, I don't know, in a way we are maybe getting our sea legs with the constant chaos, which is an entirely different level of chaos than we saw in President Trump's first term. There's one last thing I want to say before I bring in Kate. Um, there was definitely an aspect of of Donald Trump's first term that certainly before COVID, uh, there was a way in which if you were not plugged into politics, you could say, "What chaos? You know, the economy's fine. Uh, it's not affecting my life." I don't think people can say that now. I think stuff is happening now that affects everybody's life, and that's different. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about various court cases and all the crazy stuff going on right now. So, Kate, and just to be clear for people, we made a decision kind of editorially for the whole team. We're not doing a staff night about that speech, perhaps for not unrelated reasons to the totally independent decision that I made. But what's your feel? What's your feel? Where are we now?
Okay, so on the one hand, letting go of the fact that states of the union used to be important has been like hard for me personally because I'm like a nerd about these things. I like Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States. Like I think that's kind of exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they're like inherently boring speeches, kind of always because it has to be a laundry list and it's hard to have like soaring oratory when you're like, and now on to my energy section. For any pedants who are listening, I know this is technically a joint session of Congress, the first one, not a State of the Union, but um, I think part of the reason why this one has had so little kind of bounce afterwards is partially just oversaturation. Like Trump is everywhere and he talks to the press constantly. I mean, it's in really, really sharp relief after Biden that he will like gather the pool, in the Oval Office or whatever, like 5 or 6 times a day, and when you're doing it that often, you don't make news a lot of that time. Like a lot of it's blabbering. He has his old fixations that he just like constantly circles back on. And that's what a lot of this speech was. I think one of, if not the longest, States of the Union ever. And I thought the only value in kind of listening to such a liar speak is insofar as you can take cues about like where he wants to go, right? For most presidents, this is this is a version of their legislative checklist. Like here's the
Okay.
stuff that they want to do. And some of it is, highfalutin and aspirational, and some of it is a real guide map about their priorities. But as we've seen, Trump has no interest in using the fully Republican Congress. He's doing everything through executive action and just kind of trusting that everyone else will get on board later, right? So it's not really useful from that vantage point. And then that just leaves you with like foreign policy signaling. Maybe you can take from the speech if his posture is on Israel, Gaza, or I mean, you don't really need the speech to know where it is on Ukraine, but that's the other kind of use of them usually. And the entire kind of Gaza section of the speech was like, yep, the Middle East, it's a rough neighborhood. And then on to the next. So you're like, sweet, a lot of insight there, right? And then the other kind of like heaviest foreign policy section was, yeah, we're going to take Greenland by force, maybe. So it's kind of where you're left. So yeah, I mean, substantively, it's just also Stephen Miller is just like a terrible speechwriter. And I guess I don't know that this particular one was his handiwork, but it sure feels like it. Like, God, it's boring. And you can tell because Trump gets so bored, right? And that's when he goes off script and starts talking about like electrocuted sharks and water pressure in his showers and stuff. But, it's
Right.
just not a great work of art in on top of the fact that there's not a ton to substantively divine from the content.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I found interesting, and this was, in a lot of ways, these are the things you learn more about from a speech, is that on the day of the speech, they were sort of telegraphing. I mean, you had this, bizarre, kind of bizarre contrast where, um, as you say, in the old days, there used to be a fairly bipartisan sense of festivity around these speeches. You know, the opposition kind of wants it to go poorly. The president's party is excited in a different way, but there's still a sense of expectation. The sort of the political world is going to come together and see what the top guy has, basically. And you had this very surreal tableau on Tuesday, where on the one hand you have a sort of a very low energy version of that sense of festivity on the one hand, and you have all these headlines that are sort of like steep depression now seeming more likely because of the things the president just did, and we're not sure why he did them. And so it was there were not great headlines, kind of leading into it. And what the White House put out are like, we're going full trans, man. Trans, 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 and more trans. And, kind of uh, uh, saying, without totally saying it, yeah, the economy thing is not at its best moment right now, and we're not really gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about trans people. We're gonna talk about deporting people, because that's, those are, I mean, it is certainly true that those are crowd pleasers in the MAGA base, right? That's kind of what they did, right? That was the, kind of little tariff here, tariff there, but that was about it.
I mean, that is a really good point because the I've been like really interested in the kind of economic rhetoric that they've been doing recently, right? It's like no one really knows what's going to happen with the tariffs. Every single day it's like, "Oh, we're rolling them back. Oh, we're only doing them on X products. Oh, it's not for another month." Um but even aside from that, like inflation is kind of stubbornly high right now, right? He keeps like picking fights with Canada and Mexico, which will have, direct ramifications on our economic state. And so I've been the tariffs thing has always been inscrutable to me. Like I understand it maybe as an attempt to have leverage over the business community. This idea of like every time someone is not really coming to heel, you can be like, well, tariffs, right? And then they like kind of jump into line. But
Yeah.
this aggregate sense of like uncertainty in a macroeconomic sense is just that is bad for the United States. Like that's bad for Trump. The markets don't like uncertainty.
And that point right there is, I think you zeroed in on the key thing. It's bad for Trump.
Right.
Like, I don't think something being bad for the United States, that's kind of like, who cares? But the one thing we know about this guy is things that are bad for Trump, that goes to the top of the list. And
Right.
like, you are the incumbent president, and like, that stuff matters. And so there's just this kind of penumbra of weirdness over the whole thing, because even as you're just saying, they just did, I mean, it's so all over the place. It has been hard for me to keep track, even over the course of the day. I believe he has now carved out the auto industry, which is certainly not all, but a big part of the U.S. Canada bilateral trade relationship. And I think now they're saying, everything that is, kind of Trump NAFTA is excluded, which is basically everything, not
Right.
literally everything, but pretty damn close. But it's only for a month. And that it doesn't work that way. No one can. It is very strange, because these things have horrific impacts on the economy, and it's his economy now. Like, you see them making like these like half-hearted, like, the Biden economy is doing, like, even they
Right.
can't get their heart into it.
Right. I mean, and not to mention the facets of the economy that people were really upset about before Trump. Like, I mean, it's not like he's doing anything to address housing costs, right? Or wage stagnation. So you already have that as your kind of baseline of economic grouchiness. And then like you said, their only quote unquote strategy around this like pumping uncertainty into the macroeconomic arena seems to be, well, Biden left us with a shitty economy, which you got to imagine to the extent that that has any mileage with people, it's got to be expiring pretty soon. Like maybe that works for the first few weeks, but after a time, people are going to be like, yeah, and he hasn't been president for quite some time. And then the other piece, I don't know if you saw this, I think this was just today. Scott Bessent said, like, I want to get this engraved somewhere that cheap goods are not essential to the American dream, which
Okay.
okay, baby, run on that, see how people feel about that take. I mean, it's very much, and this is a recurring point, right? They keep saying things like, "Oh, there'll be some pain, but Americans can withstand." Like, I just don't think general people are like, "Hell yeah, I'll withstand pain for what? What reason?" Right? Like they're trying to put it into this framing of like growing a victory garden and like abiding by a sugar ration for the greater cause, but it's like for what? Like there's
Yeah.
no actual purpose except for this kind of free floating and random vindictiveness that seems to kind of shut on and shut off according to whoever's been in his ear or whether he's had a phone call with the leader of that particular nation in the past 24 hours.
That is exactly the point. That is always there for a president to a head of state to call on. We need to pull together. We need to sacrifice. It would at least be arguable if they were to say the deficit is out of control. We can't have this much debt. We have to finally confront it now, and we're going to do it, and it's going to hurt, but we have to do it. There's lots of reasons why I think that is not valid, but at least there's a framework there. There is a large national debt. We've been running big structural deficits mostly for the last half century, and certainly for the last 25 years. Blah 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 blah. But that's not actually what this is. They're not even making that argument, and so it is kind like I probably I don't know if I overestimate it. I do think most people are going to say, yeah, it wasn't great under the Biden economy, but it was kind of okay. How did this happen? How are we suddenly like going into a steep depression out of nowhere? I mean, to your point, what are we fighting about? Why did this happen? Like I think it was, I can't remember who said this to me. Uh, Someone made this thing kind of like there's literally one person in the United States who's like totally spun up about tariffs. Like it's not even like it's not even like with with the trans stuff that you can say, why is Trump doing this? Well, there's a chunk of this country that is really, this is their big hobby horse. They hate trans people, right? There's a constituency. May not be a majority constituency, but there's a constituency. It's the same way with immigration. Tariffs, like it really is. There's like one dude, and it's happening because that dude is president. It's nuts. It's nuts. And again, I the joke is on all of us because we are all going to suffer the consequences. But I think it's going to be on Trump because this is going to have a big effect. And I don't, I don't totally get what their plan is, how they think this is going to work out. Because the logical thing would be to say, hey, I called Justin and Claudia. Is it Claudia? Is her first name the president of Mexico? Right. And like turns out we're set now. We're good to go. I am victorious and we're going back to the old system and onward and upward. But by keep doing it month by month, and he keeps adding stuff with China and stuff, they're kind of, it's like accelerating into the brick wall. I don't get it.
And to whatever extent he can get people to buy on to this whole Canada and Mexico are our enemies thing, which I think is like a harder ask than he thinks, because part of having Canada and Mexico close is that like a lot of Americans have been to those countries, you know? I mean, it's hard to make them into this kind of like scary foreign villain, you know, when I how many friends do I have who vacation in Mexico City, but um you know, part of I think the selling point would be it's his thing of like we're being jerked around, we're being played for chumps and we're not abiding by that anymore, which fine, but like that message gets muddied by, as you say, these kind of month to month extensions and asking for nothing in return. At least the first time he got these like fake concessions that the Biden administration had already gotten, but now it's just nothing. It's just like, oh, we talked on the phone and it's fine and we won't do this for another month, right? And I but even in a more perfect situation for him where say he got some kind of concessions and was crowing about them and we've brought our, allies to heel or whatever. I just don't think that people would still care that much if it translates into stuff is more expensive, you know? Because it brings you back to the okay, I'm paying for this. For what? I don't have any beef with Canada, right?
Yeah, no, it's look, I mean, there is certainly a broader deindustrialization issue here, which I think is largely misunderstood in a political context. I mean, the reality that is hard for Americans to quite accept is that we had a huge war. We were totally intact. Everybody else's country was destroyed, basically. And so we had like 30 years where we made everything. And that was awesome for us. And then people fixed their countries. And that started not being the case anymore. And it is certainly also true that you have a kind of a whole trend, sort of long-term global trend of market liberalization and stuff, and you do have deindustrialization in the United States, but just putting back big tariffs will not have people making, building factories that are now in Laos. That's not going to happen. That's not how it works. I think that certainly during the Biden administration, I think this continues. There is a fundamentally different idea about industrial policy, that maybe we do care where our microchips are made, and we care where this is made, and there's certain blah 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 blah. But this stuff is there are certain economic nationalists who are into this, but it kind of has it basically has no real constituency. And I had Peter Navarro, and people will remember. I guess the last thing we saw with Peter Navarro is when he uh, got in trouble for contempt of Congress. Did he go to jail? I think he actually did go to jail for a few months, and I can't remember, along with the other guy. In any case, he's back in the White House, and he was on. I saw an interview on Fox with him last night, and he was saying literally the Mexican drug cartels have taken over Canada. It is now run by the Mexican drug cartels, and I'm watching this, and I'm like, even in Foxland, even in MAGA land, people have to look at that and say, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? That is that then like what are you talking about? And to your point, people go to Canada, people go to Mexico. Um, Certainly with Canada, to a lot of Americans, they can barely tell the difference. Like, am I in Canada? Am I in Mexico? Like, slightly, vaguely different accent. I mean, to Canadians, I'm not saying you're not your own country. I'm just saying Americans are so familiar with Canada, and obviously we speak the same language. We have a very similar political culture, although certainly not identical. People go to Mexico all the time. You can get people kind of wound up about Mexican drug cartels. Those are real. They're a real threat within Mexico, real threat to the authority of the state. Um, but the idea that we've got some beef with Mexico is absurd. And again, I want to come back to this point because a lot of times when Trump now is doing something that just seems illogical, even for Trump, people will say, "Well, we're not going to have elections anymore, so what do they care?" Right? Maybe it doesn't matter that everybody's upset because we're not going to have elections anymore. As you've probably seen from hearing me talk here or reading what I write, I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's the case either in the literal sense or in the sense that public opinion doesn't matter anymore. I think that's absurd. I think people have hubris. Hubris is a thing. You can start to think that nothing applies to you anymore. And it may be the case with Donald Trump that he's not up in 2 years. Congress is up in 2 years, but he's had not a full Democratic Congress, but he's had Democratic House. It wasn't the end of the world, right? But there is this kind of disconnect that, and look, they can also probably be arguing, look, that's 2 years from now. This is going to be ancient history in 2 years. Maybe not. But it's weird because there's a big disconnect.
So we kind of wandered off the speech, which is fine, but I wanted to do one more just briefly because there's already been a lot of ink spilled about this. But on the Democratic response to this speech, this was kind of a fraught thing going in, right? Because leadership was kind of against big displays, right? Which some people think is pretty weak. And then it created this like mishmash where like some people are wearing pink and some people are wearing white and some people are holding these little like auctioneer paddles and some people didn't go and some people left and some people came back. um I would say overall I don't think I don't think it matters really. Like, I don't think the speech really mattered. I don't think the response to it really mattered. But I've been hammering this drum of now, while the elections are still far out, I am just all for Democrats just like trying stuff. And that means that some stuff is not going to land and some stuff is going to look stupid and some stuff you're going to get made fun of for. But it's like nobody is really paying attention yet. It doesn't matter. You've got the most latitude you're ever going to have to kind of fall on your face. So, get out there and try. And from that perspective, um, I think if I had been in charge, I would have done a mass boycott, or more specifically, I think I would have waited 5 minutes into the speech and then had all the Democrats get up and leave. A It's dramatic, right? That's like good TV. That clip would have gotten
That would
shared
dominate the night.
around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Trump would have like lost his shit, right? There's a pretty good chance we would have had like a pretty prolonged meltdown after that happened and an inability for him to like find his way back to his speech. And then you would have had a situation where like you probably would have had Republicans huddling in the crowd and maybe some rushing over to fill the Democratic seat so it doesn't look like. I think it would have put him off kilter in a way that would
And
have
it would have
been
been
good.
the story. It would have been
Yeah.
the story. Like whether you liked it or not, it would have been the story. And his speech and anything he said would have been in the old metaphor, under the fold.
Right. And I just want to I think that what has been so disheartening about Trump this time and the kind of muted resistance is the accompanying idea that the first time people acted like it wasn't normal, right? Like Trump officials got heckled in restaurants and when Mike Pence went to Broadway, like people wouldn't perform. There was just this kind of like cultural disobedience thing of no, we're not going to like treat you with politeness because you don't deserve my respect. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really powerful force. And so I think sitting in the audience as if it's a normal State of the Union just works against that. It does make it seem like it's, he's a little crazier than a normal politician, but mostly it's kind of business as usual. So I am pro everyone who did something that was more on the disruptive side. And that includes for me Al Green, who got marched out of there because he kind of stood up and was shouting about how Trump doesn't have a mandate to cut Medicaid. And then there was this little ridiculous internecine like pearl clutching of, oh my God, no one has manners anymore. Like Democrats are just as bad as Republicans. And in their little censure vote in the House today, 10 Democrats voted with Republicans to censure him. And it's like, who cares, right? I mean, who cares in any kind of way? This guy's in a safe seat, right? Like, I think people thought that the guy who yelled "you lie" at Obama was probably more of an asshole than not at the time, and they probably think that with Al Green too. But then on the other hand, that's the only story that has Medicaid cuts in it because Trump didn't talk about it. Like, he at least
Mhm.
kind of got that into the headlines. And again, this is why I think the case for a more like unified walkout would have been better, because you don't put like a single head on the line like this, and you don't have the kind of like stupid inner democratic sniping about if that was good or bad. But again, you got to try something. You got to be a little bit brave. You have to find a way to channel people's anger, because I think right now, especially if you're looking at the numbers, dismal. Like Democrats on Democrats, it's just, I've never seen things so low. You're hearing
Mhm.
more and more chatter about kind of like, is Chuck Schumer going to get tea partied? Like the moment seems kind of ripe for someone more energetic to take over.
Right.
So, from that
Right. Right.
perspective, that's where I land on everything. I think you got to do something a little more creative than just kind of like, well, I was there and I sat with a frown on my face, and that's resistance. Like, you got to do a little bit more than that right now.
Yeah, the thing that I took away from this is that, because I'm suffused in social media, and had people saying, "Oh, the paddles were pathetic," or "wearing pink was pathetic," or, I mean, most people were more favorable to Al Green, but what Al Green did was pathetic, and this was everything, like getting up and leaving was pathetic, and staying was pathetic. And what you see here is that the enormity of what Trump is doing is so great. There is sort of this osmotic dynamic in politics. They're doing something bad. You need to rise to it, to to again address that osmotic imbalance, right? You need to express your displeasure, express your outrage in a way that is commensurate. And there is simply nothing that can be commensurate with what is happening in the country right now. And that's not letting Democrats off the hook. Um, Again, I am mainly of the inclination that the speech didn't matter, the response to the speech didn't matter. Something that does matter is that continuing resolution. That's a binary choice. Are you going to, work within this moment and say, okay, we'll trade you this for that? Or are you going to say, no, we're not participating here? I don't want to get into that whole issue, but I want to come back to that. That's real. That has real implications. This stuff, kind of, we're going to forget about it in 3 days, basically. But again, there's that issue that I have some sympathy for the Democrats, because as much as I don't think they're responding to the moment, that again, that imbalance is so great that there is basically nothing they can do to operate within that imbalance in a way that appears to address it. And that's what I was trying to capture when I was saying that, again, there were, of all the angry Democrats, you had one faction of angry Democrats who was outraged that people were sitting there, another that thought it was pathetic to get up and leave. Again, there's nothing they can do to operate within that. And again, it's not saying it's not letting them off the hook. It is, I think that point is the real one we need to be thinking about, because they cannot figure out how to address this moment. They can't.
Exactly. I mean, there is a really lucrative, like, especially social media niche right now, which is also, can you fucking believe they didn't do anything? And then it was, can you fucking believe how stupid they looked when they did something? Like, from to the left, from the left. Like,
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
winning post right now.
yeah.
But to me, it all comes back to this idea of like, okay, best case scenario, right? Trump, I don't know, doesn't try an illegal additional run for president, right? And so JD Vance or somebody else runs, they lose, Democrats win. Okay, let's say Democrats get a trifecta in 28. Like the work that is going to have to be done to mend this damage is immense, and it is quote unquote radical compared with what Democrats have been comfortable up until this point. And that includes like resurrecting really ironclad protections of the civil service, figuring out how to get people to come back into the civil service and how to market it as like a stable workplace again. You are going to have to do Supreme Court expansion, probably. You might have to expand the whole federal judiciary. You got to get rid of the filibuster. Maybe you take a look at the Electoral College, but like stuff that if you asked elected Democrats today, 95% of them would be against the entire slate of things as too reactionary. And my huge fear here is that if we as a country and as a democracy get lucky enough to be in that situation in 28, that we're going to be presented with another like Joe Biden playbook. Another, well, that was gruesome. Glad that's over. Let's turn the page and be back to normalcy. That did not work. That helped usher Trump back in. And that means that we only have a few years for Democrats to radically reconstitute how they think about their role in this country. And they have to get comfortable doing things that they are nowhere close to comfortable right now. You can't even get them all to agree to like, a Supreme Court ethics uh, agreement, right? Like the lowest, fakest hanging fruit. And so to me, everything has to be a piece of building that new muscle that when they get into office again, they don't do this, the defensive crouch stuff, the waiting for the right wing to get mad and cowering in fear, that they get in and they say, no matter how big they won by, we have a mandate and we are going to make sure that the next Trump can't do this again or take us to an even worse place. And that is going to require just really stiff spines, considering the right wing media ecosystem, considering the way the mainstream media ecosystem is biased against them. And so that everything is part of that conversation to me. And when it's stuff like, I totally agree with you, the speech doesn't really matter, the response to the speech doesn't really matter, but when you can't kind of get leadership to like agree to a mass walkout, then I just feel like we are light years away from where they're going to need to be if they get lucky enough to break back into power. And that I think is deadly serious.
I 100% agree. And I think we are light years away from that. There's no question we're light years away from that. I did this post. I assume people saw the headline, this kind of sede vacantist idea of that we're kind of in a constitutional interregnum right now, right? We're operating outside the Constitution. We're going to try to get it back, but we are operating outside of it. The Supreme Court is not legitimate. The president is operating outside the Constitution. And an emailer of ours, who I consider a friend, although I've never met him in person, wrote me this long email. I think I'll probably publish it. And making the argument, and the first part of this argument is a conventional one, that there are sort of three constitutions in American history. There's the pre-Civil War Constitution. There is the Civil War to the New Deal Constitution. And then there's the current one. And he was basically saying, we're clearly that New Deal Constitution is over, right? The question is, what's next? We're moving into a new era. I'm not sure we're quite at that level of transition, but we clearly, there's the Biden idea that we were setting the clock back to 2015, that if there's one thing I think everybody can understand, that did not work. It was fundamentally misconceived. Many people thought it was misconceived at the beginning. Everybody can see that it's misconceived now. You have to fundamentally rework the structure of the federal government. You have to make democratic government in this country much more responsive. You have to do big things. That is obvious. It is also obvious that the congressional leadership of the Democratic Party is not. Maybe they realize that that's necessary. They don't know how to get there right now. Maybe they will get there. I have this role that I think people kind of expect. I'm always the one saying, "Hey, it's not as they're not messing up as bad as you think. There's constraints that they're operating under that you don't know about. I saw someone saying, kind of somewhere yesterday, oh, the Democrats don't understand that they are putting every single one of themselves at risk of a primary when they are up next time. It's the disconnect is that bad. Or when people say, as you said at the beginning of the episode, Kate, the poll numbers for Democrats among Democrats right now are dismal. And that's why the overall numbers are dismal. They're not dismal because independents and Republicans like them less. Democrats like them less. But the key here, in my mind, the reason that I'm kind of semi okay with all of these things is that opposition to Trump is driving this. All the Democrats may be replaced with new Democrats because everybody's so angry that everybody gets primaried. And okay, that's fine. That might completely be necessary. But the thing I come back to is it's always the people. It's always public opinion that says, no way, we're not doing that. And then they find candidates to act through. As much as I agree with everybody that what Democrats are putting forward now is like the slogans and the strategies are not there, to a degree, it doesn't make a difference. Well, take that back. It is not as important as you might think because the popular outrage to this, opposition to this, it may just kind of sweep all those people in its path. That may be what's coming. And I completely agree that even stuff with like the civil service, someone was telling me the fact is it doesn't matter how many laws you make. We have to deal with the fact now that anybody working for the government has to know next time there's a Trump administration, you might all get fired. And that's going to have massive, massive knock-on effects for just everything. And you kind of can't, you can build more things in, but they're already breaking all the laws right now. Right. So this is very big changes will need to happen when Democrats have unified power again in the federal government. There's no getting around that. There's no going back to that, post, let's put it this way, post Cold War American political system that started in about 1990, late Bush, Bill Clinton. There's no going back to that system. We're going to have a new system, and it'll either be a Trumpist system or it'll be a revitalized civic democratic system. And that's just the reality, I think.
So let's talk about a big Supreme Court decision that came down yesterday morning. We're recording a day late on Thursday, so this was Wednesday morning. And this was about Trump's sweeping orders to just turn off the spigot of all federal aid, including, and this case stemmed from, work that has been done already. So this is just the bill you got to pay for services rendered, right? And there was some back and forth at the lower court level. The judge said, no, you got to pay the money. And then the plaintiffs are saying, hey, guess what? They're still not paying the money. Hold them in contempt. And so then to enforce the restraining order, the judge said, okay, you got to pay the money by midnight tonight or you're in trouble, kind of thing. There's an appeal to the Supreme Court. And this was a big moment, okay, because I think it was our first early test about to what degree the Supreme Court is going to be compliant with the Trump administration, because this is just, it's cut and dry. The money has been appropriated. The work has been done. You have to pay. You just have to. That's how things work, right? So we'd gotten an administrative stay in the case, which some people were really freaking out about because they interpreted it as, again, this is cut and dry, and now you're leaving these people without the aid that they have been promised and deserve for, X number of days. That's kind of ominous. But this decision we got Wednesday morning John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett sided with the liberals, and they backed up the lower court judge. They said, "Yeah, no, you got to pay this," and then they kind of knocked the case back down and said, assign everything, new deadlines, kind of delineate exactly what they have to do. And then there was this very angry dissent by Alito, writing for himself, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Thomas, where he just goes on a blistering rant about how dare one measly district judge force the American taxpayer to pay $2 billion that the government will never get back, and framing this whole thing as if it's like a new cost to be incurred, not already allocated money. And also just like a really funny dissent coming from the guy who has upheld the Kasmerics of the world again and again. He really didn't seem to have any difficulty with like the tyranny of a single district judge when he was ruling against the Biden administration. But this was just a tentative early good sign in terms of Barrett's kind of sporadic but burgeoning independence has been showing up on bigger and bigger cases. And let me tell you, the MAGA corner of the internet is not happy that the DEI judge is fucking over the hand that fed her now. And then you also got Roberts, who again sporadically can kind of be counted on from this like institutional legitimacy place, even though he's in a bit of a weird spot because he has also so aggressively led the charge against agencies and in favor of this unitary executive theory that like he helped cook up within the Reagan administration. But this is like the tentative kind of, your greatest hopes are pinned on coalition right now are the libs, Barrett, and Roberts. And this was just an early instance where if they had just rubber stamped what Trump did here, like that's kind of it, right? There's nothing they're not going to say yes to. So here at least you have an indication that they're not going to bless every government destroying thing that he brings up to them.
How much was, I mean, the negative side, I'm not sure it's a rejoinder because I know you're agreeing with this, but the sort of the downside look at that is that they already did the work.
Mhm.
Like, it's sort of like it is conceptually both in outside of government and inside government. You don't want to do something anymore. You don't have to do it anymore. But so you stop going to Chipotle and getting the burrito, right? But you don't get your money back for the ones you ate last week, right? I mean, so it that put it at a different level. They already did the work. And again, as I understood this case, no one disputed that. No one disputed that Congress appropriated the money for doing stuff like this. Administration chooses someone to do it, and they did it. And now there's a bill, and the question is, can the president just say no? Again, that should be pretty close to like open and shut, and yet it was not open and shut.
A
Did he? Let me ask.
5-4.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Let me ask you this: Did Alito? What was what did? How did Alito address that fact
That the work had
that
already been
that the
done.
work's already done? Yeah,
Oh, I mean, pretended that wasn't part of the case, like,
just
didn't
kind of
address it
ignored
at
it.
all.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
It
Okay,
was just
yeah,
this argument. It was like a sovereign immunity argument about how one judge can't have the jurisdiction to restrain a president kind of thing, which, like, you're totally right. I mean, this is as low-hanging fruit as it gets, but also we're in an era where the mission to create a monarch, like an
yeah,
all-powerful
yeah.
president, is so close to realization that kind of
Take anything we
the
can get.
mildest pushback, you're like,
Right.
"Okay, it's something," right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, did as the case was structured and as the case was argued, did it really ignore everything but the fact that the work had already been done? Did it get into these other issues about power of the purse and appropriations, and can you kind of shut down whole departments that Congress did it, or were those just not at issue?
Well, it got up so fast. All of this was in an emergency posture that there wasn't
Right.
an extended briefing on it. But yeah,
Right.
I mean,
Okay.
that was a central thing. And then the other cases that I've been covering this week have to do with the firings of leaders at these agencies where they have protection from removals, right? Where they can't be fired at will, where there are these very kind of specific categories where that's the only way that Congress allows for them to be removed. And it involves notice, it involves hearing. And Trump just said, nope. Democrats on, National Labor Relations Board, Democrats on Merit Systems Protection Board axed. So they can either stop functioning or he has room to kind of put in his stooges and take over those entities. And those cases are also moving up very quickly. And it's just almost like farcical. Like, for instance, yesterday I was listening to the hearing in the NLRB case, and no one disagrees that the Trump administration broke the law, right? Like, the judge gets the DOJ guy up there and goes, okay, so here are the facts of the cases. I see them. Tell me if you disagree, right? Like, she was fired without cause. He says, correct. The judge says, she wasn't fired for any of these three legal reasons that she can be fired. Correct. The Supreme Court precedent protecting her removal protections is still good law and binding on this court. Correct. Right. So it's this funny situation where she kind of staged this little like one woman protest almost. This is Beryl Howell, who's a judge in DC. Her name has come up a little bit with Trump stuff the first time, but she had opened the phone lines and kept this a public hearing and said, basically used it as this like primer for the public who is listening. And she said, I know I'm just a speed bump on the way to the Supreme Court here, but you know, she got up the lawyer for the fired NLRB member and said, "Can you tell me the history of this agency? Why was it created? What problem was it helping to solve? Is it important just to people in Washington, or is it important to all people?" And like went through this kind of like independent agency 101 stuff, and then got into this like long kind of explanation of the unitary executive theory, and how this is the most extreme possible form of it, where when the president can fire everyone in the executive branch. And it was just like, I've never heard a judge kind of use a hearing in this way before. But I thought it was like a creative kind of form of pushback, right? Because in the end, like as she says, they know that they're breaking the law. Like their whole intent is just to get this case up in front of the Supreme Court and have them overturn their old precedent. Like they know lower courts can't. I mean, unless you're Matthew Kacsmaryk, like you have to abide by Supreme Court precedent, right? So I don't know. It was interesting, but those cases in particular, especially because they're about kind of independent agency walling off parts of the executive branch from the president's reach, that is going to be a a much bigger test than the USAID case was, because that's a place where like Roberts is all game for King president, right? So you're really going to have to depend on him like not liking headlines to break with his own orthodoxy on that point and be like, no, I'm not letting Trump fully take over the entire executive branch.
Yeah, no, that part is, well, I mean, there was just this uh, uh, new development this morning, which ties into part of the litigation stream you were just mentioning, where this guy, God, I'm forgetting his
Dillinger,
what's Dellinger's first name again?
Hampton, right?
Hampton. I was thinking Hannibal. Like, no, it's not Hannibal.
I mean,
Uh,
Hampton is weird too.
yeah, it is. It is weird. Well, very old blue blood must be. In any
Mhm.
case, all right. Where you have in the litigation that has to do with the president's ability to kind of just fire however he wants in the executive branch. Not this in here, it's not the question of independent agencies, although we'll be in a second. It's just civil servants. Can he just like fire, and anybody who are there any limits on that? You've got this Office of Special Counsel that kind of one of its briefs is to is to review those kind of things. You have a board that they make recommendations to. Trump's trying to fire everybody. So there was one guy who's been fired, then unfired, and fired again. This guy Hampton Dellinger, and this morning he basically said, "Okay, I'm done. This is going to the Supreme Court. I'm not going to win there. So kind of I've done my piece." I think I think we are assuming generally that the Supreme Court is going to say that the president is fully in control of every board that we have thought of as kind of independent in the past. He's fully in control. They work totally for him. And that obviously constrains and shapes how the next 4 years is going to work out, right? I mean, maybe there's going to be maybe it's not going to be 100%, but I think, I mean, you're following this side of this more closely than I am. I mean, that is our assumption, right?
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, in terms of the Dillinger case, every single person I talked to was like, "He's got no shot. He's gonna lose at SCOTUS."
Yeah.
They are pessimistic about these other independent agencies. Most people told me, if I was a betting person, I would think that the precedent gets overturned here. And all of them, kind of unprompted, said the same thing, which is, my only ray of optimism here is that they are going to be too afraid to let the Federal Reserve get taken over by partisans. And it's really hard to separate out the Fed from these other multi-member led agencies. And now some people think maybe they'll just do something really disingenuous and be like, the Fed is special for XYZ reason, to try to keep it independent because that's the only agency they care about.
Hmm. Okay.
And some people are saying maybe you look at the history and you say, well, this traditionally has not been under the president's purview or something, but then none of these agencies have. So basically, this was something I really kind of honed in on in my interviews was, is there a way, a kind of intellectual way to wall off the Fed from these other agencies? And they said nothing coherent. They could make something up, but the reason why these are the agencies that have persisted in keeping their independence, and single-headed agencies, they lost their removal protections, is just because of the Fed.
Yeah, I didn't fully I should have fully realized that. I did not fully realize that we were actually thinking that if you uh, if you basically abolish the FTC and the SEC and all the kind of the acronym independent boards that we're thinking about, that how do that then the president runs the Federal Reserve. But I don't know why I wouldn't think that. So
Well,
good
I
point,
mean,
I guess.
it's funny because the Trump side is clearly very cognizant of this. And
Hmm.
if in that executive order where it purported to put all independent agencies under Trump's power just by like waving a magic wand, they said in there they're walling off the Fed's monetary policy duties. That still gets to be independent, which is
Like
funny
to be
because,
nice, basically,
right, because
not
the
because they
Fed
have
does
to. Right.
monetary policy and then it does regulation, right? And so with under the same board, mind you. So there's this idea of like, well, when they're on this side of the tape dividing the room, they can be fired by Trump. If they're on this side, they're protected, right? And every time, in all these cases, judges keep seizing on this point and asking, this came up. There was a huge prolonged section in this on the NLRB arguments yesterday where the judge was like, so is the Fed included in this? And they're skittish, jumpy, not really answering. And then she'll go, okay, let me ask it this way. What would be an executive branch agency that wouldn't be directly under Trump's control and vulnerable to at will firing? None, right? I mean, and so she just came back to this point. She was like, okay, so that includes the Fed. And she was like, this is the most extreme form of the unitary executive theory I've ever heard. And that's, I mean, that's the end point. Like I wrote this piece where I was just like, the Supreme Court may have a red line here, and it would just be born out of the fact that when these cases especially get up to the Supreme Court docket, we're going to see all kinds of amicus briefs from like traditional conservative businessy types being like, you cannot let the central bank get taken over by Trump. That is going to ruin the economy, the global economy.
No, because I'm sure you're going to get not even not even Peter Navarro as Fed chief, but like, pick your random Trump person, him, and it would be, and I'm sure you would have a new Fed chair every. We lose track of the fact that this is supposed to apply to the FBI. FBI
Totally.
is a 10-year position, and we've sort of, kind of like, all right, that's different now. You just pick your own person, or you pick your own person, then you sort of deep state them over a few years, then you fire them. So
I guess we've
I
forgotten about Watergate, right? It's too far
yeah,
in the
yeah,
past,
exactly.
so
Well, this is the thing. I had not. I feel embarrassed saying this, like, live, but I had not fully absorbed that is the track that they are on. Not that I don't understand that it's not what Trump wants to do. I had not fully absorbed that is in practice where they are going with this, almost in spite of themselves. I don't think John Roberts wants to put the Federal Reserve under Trump, but he so wants to, propound this absurd and alien theory of unitary executive power that kind of like, when you make a unitary omelet, some eggs are going to get cracked. I don't know what to
and
say, guys.
it's like such a sad state of affairs because you have all these lawyers who are getting up there advocating for, the agency that helps workers and the agency that protects consumers, and their whole
What about
arguments
the
are just the
agency
Fed.
that protects hugely accumulated wealth from like
Exactly.
runaway inflation and wealth destruction?
They're like, "We know you don't care about this, but you might care about that."
Yeah, 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 exactly. All right, all right. Well, Josh learns something new every day. And again,
Hey, this is what you pay me the big bucks for, yeah.
exactly, exactly. Well, I didn't have the vision to see in this absurd a direction. So this is why I need you keeping me up to date on the latest things. I think that's probably all we got for this
Uh,
episode. Yeah,
that's our State of the Union.
that is our State of the Union. Well, let me couple reminders. So probably everybody, or most of the people who are listening, are members, TPM members. If you are not, we are in the midst of our annual March membership drive. It's really important. We've got a really big goal this year. We're trying to add 2,500 new members, which is kind of an absurd goal, but we're trying for it. You'll hear if you'll hear us over the next few weeks on the pod, on the website, talking about why it's important. Obviously, we are an independent news organization. It's important to our business model, but there's more general reasons why it's important. Independent media, the values of our organization. If you if you are not a member, please consider becoming a member. It's a great time to do it. We have a 25% discount for the length of, for during this drive. And if you are a member, please, mention it to your friends and stuff like that. Might be, they should check out TPM. If they're sometimes readers, maybe consider joining. The other thing is we're still doing this ballot for where we are going to go in this great land of ours for our next live edition of the pod. We did one was a few weeks ago, was in January, late January. We did one in Washington D.C. I think the sort of universal belief was that it was great. We had a great time. We met a lot of you. It was sort of a fun time had by all. We're looking at where we're going to go. Are we going to go somewhere on the West Coast, somewhere in the middle of the country? We have barred ourselves from the Northeast corridor, although maybe Boston has an outside shot, right? You guys are kind of far away. In any case, if you haven't voted yet, vote, because we really want to know where there's the most interest. And obviously, this is not going to be our only uh, you know one of these. We're going to come to other places in the future, but this is going to be the first one. So make sure to vote if you haven't yet had the chance to do so. And that's it for this week. Yeah?
All right. See you next week.
Later.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.